How do you imagine the perfect spy? Invisible both in a crowd and in an empty square? Appearing from nowhere and vanishing into nothing? Intelligent and cunning? Yes, but all of that is far too trivial. However, nature has created beings that seem as if they came straight from another planet. They can move using jet propulsion. They can deceive an enemy by creating a ghost of themselves. They can hypnotize their victims. Somewhere around now, you're probably thinking, no, that's too much. And you'd be wrong. All of this is only part of the Mystery of Cuttlefish. Let's begin with the fact that this fish is not a fish at all. It's a cephalopod mollusk, and not a single species, but about 120 of them. Cuttlefish are often grouped together with the classic terrors of sailor folklore, giant squids and octopuses, but mythology and fantasy have absolutely no room to run wild here. The largest cuttlefish barely reach around 20 inches, excluding their tentacles, and the smallest species are tiny, just around 0.7 to 1 inch. Almost none of you have ever seen a live cuttlefish, but many people have held its skeleton in their hands. That very white cuttlebone for parakeets from the pet store, the cuttlebone is its internal shell. An internal shell sounds like an oxymoron, like hot snow, but yes, a cuttlefish has its shell on the inside. Today, we'll answer the two main questions: how and, more importantly, why? Believe us, this isn't even the strangest thing about them. Keep watching. It only gets more interesting from here. A cuttlefish has 3 hearts. 2 of them pump blood through the gills, and 1 serves the entire body. And the blood is bluish because oxygen is carried not by iron, like in us, but by copper. It also has quite the brains. In experiments, cuttlefish can remember objects, distinguish patterns, change their behavior if something doesn't work, and even successfully pass the famous marshmallow test, which not all human children manage. As a reminder, the marshmallow test is an experiment in which children are given a choice: eat 1 marshmallow right now, or wait and receive 2. To test their ability to set aside something good in the moment for the sake of something even better in the future. It turns out cuttlefish can do this. What else? For example, if we said that cuttlefish communicate using cartoons, it wouldn't be much of an exaggeration. And they show these cartoons to each other on their own skin. Cuttlefish eyes are also unique, to say the least. The pupil is a broken, W-shaped slit, and it's hardly for the sake of aesthetics. This clever design helps the animal see more efficiently. Hard to imagine how, but you'll find out soon. With these animals, almost everything is like that. At first glance, unlike anything else. Cuttlefish are among the strangest organisms on the planet. And it's time to figure out how they even came to exist. If you look at a cuttlefish today, it's hard to believe who its relatives are. This modest little pond snail, a distant relative, but a legitimate one. Their common ancestors diverged long ago, back when there were no fish, let alone dinosaurs or mammals, anywhere on Earth. The class of cephalopod mollusks formed hundreds of millions of years ago. One of their earliest features was very practical and typical of most mollusks: a hard external shell. Picture not a cuttlefish, but something like an elongated shell with tentacles sticking out of one end. These ancient creatures crawled along the bottom or swam through the water column, using the shell as both armor and a flotation device, practical and protective. and quite beautiful. And it was the shell that became the problem. It protects well, but doesn't allow much evolutionary experimentation. When you have heavy armor, you can't do much in terms of maneuvering, speed, or clever behavioral tricks. Turtles can back this up. Over time, small revolutions began to occur among cephalopods. Some branches stayed faithful to the classic design and have survived as nautiluses, spiral shells, chambers, the whole setup. Others took a far riskier path and gradually abandoned their armor. Some of these bold creatures became squids, some became octopuses, and somewhere in between, cuttlefish found their place. Their lineage is a compromise between the old school and radical innovation. Interestingly, the outer shell disappeared, but the cuttlefish didn't end up completely without a rigid support. The shell seemed to hide inside and transform into a porous internal float. The cuttlebone, the cuttlefish's signature feature. The result was a strange structure. On the outside, a soft, flexible organism that can bend and change shape. On the inside, a light, rigid frame that helps maintain balance in the water and fine-tune buoyancy. Not quite a shell, but also not a completely boneless bag with arms like an octopus. Something in between, ideal for life in the water above the sea floor. At the same time, their lifestyle was changing. Their ancestors, ancient shelled cephalopods, were mostly slow armored torpedoes, but their shell-less descendants began experimenting actively with ambush hunting, jet propulsion, and camouflage. On the evolutionary tree, cuttlefish occupy a branch within the group known as the coleoids, the advanced cephalopods, which include squids and octopuses. This trio represents 3 answers to one question. How do you turn a mollusk into a smart, fast-moving predator without heavy external armor? The octopus chooses maximum flexibility and a liquid body without internal bones. Squids chose speed, an elongated, torpedo-shaped body with powerful fins. And the cuttlefish, something in between. A flattened body with a continuous fin along the edge and a hidden, porous float skeleton that lets it hover above the sea floor while its skin and eyes handle camouflage and light signaling. And here one can only marvel. If an octopus is basically a living sack with arms, then a cuttlefish is an underwater drone with a built-in autopilot. All of its engineering magic is hidden not in its muscles or fins, but in this strange structure inside its body. A thin, almost weightless plate, laced with chambers and partitions. If you look at it in cross-section up close, it's not just a piece of chalk. It's something highly complex, cellular, and multi-layered, as if it were printed on a 3D printer. At high magnification, it is revealed to be a multi-story structure with floors, columns, and labyrinths of voids. In a living cuttlefish, these voids are not filled with just anything and not just anyhow. They contain a mixture of liquid and gases, and their ratio is dosed with the precision of a pharmacist. Why such complexity? To win the battle against gravity. A cuttlefish needs to hover in the water column without wasting energy. No constant fin flapping, no jerky jet propulsion. Its ideal state is when the density of its body almost exactly matches the density of seawater. Slightly denser and it slowly sinks. Slightly less dense and it also slowly rises. Ideally, it simply hangs there like a balloon that has found its perfect equilibrium point. So, the internal float works like a built-in ballast compartment. The cuttlefish can expel some of the water from the chambers and even adjust the salinity of the liquid inside. When water is expelled, the gas bubbles expand, the overall body density drops, and the animal effectively becomes lighter for the sea. When the opposite is needed, water returns, the gas compresses, density increases, and buoyancy decreases. From the outside, it looks ordinary enough, a small creature calmly hovering a few inches above the bottom, gently moving its fins and barely shifting at all. But at this moment, a complex internal system is at work, quietly reconfiguring volumes, pressures, and salt concentrations. Essentially, the cuttlefish has solved the same problem as bony fish with their swim bladders, but solved it differently. A fish's bladder is flexible, capable of compressing and expanding with depth. A cuttlefish's float is rigid and multi-chambered. The volume of the structure itself changes very little. All the fine-tuning happens through the composition and quantity of fluid inside the chambers. It's a more delicate and far more sophisticated system. However, there is a price to pay for such engineering perfection. Every structure has a breaking point. At great depths, the external pressure becomes so high that even this intricate cellular shell simply risks collapsing. That's why cuttlefish have their own operating depth range. Depending on the species, their bones fracture at a depth of roughly 600 to 2,000 feet. Because of this limitation, most cuttlefish species live on shallow seabeds, typically on continental shelves. In the layer above a moderately deep bottom, among sea rocks, seaweed, and sand patches, this system works almost perfectly. There, a cuttlefish can literally hang above the substrate, gently steering with its fins, patiently waiting. For a predator above, it's almost invisible. For prey below, too. It doesn't exhaust itself with constant motion like many fish do, and can afford the luxury of true patient ambush. It's nothing short of an engineering marvel. We build submarines, calculate ballast tanks, model loads on composite materials, all to achieve something similar. A cuttlefish performs the same trick in a one-piece format. A single, naturally grown organ that solves multiple engineering problems at once. Structural support, buoyancy, and energy efficiency. Now, let's look at what happens on the outside. Because a cuttlefish has something more than skin. Essentially, its entire body is covered by a massive biological screen. By looking at it, you can tell exactly what the cuttlefish is doing at any given moment. What mechanism makes this possible? Let's explain. Up close, cuttlefish skin looks like a wild mix of biology and pixel art. In the upper layer lie chromatophores, tiny pigment-filled sacs. Each of these sacs is surrounded by a ring of muscle fibers. When the muscles contract, the sac stretches and opens like a flower, expanding the colored spot. When the muscles relax, the spot shrinks to a dot and almost disappears. A single colored bump doesn't do much by itself, but when you have thousands of them all wired into the nervous system, this is no longer skin. It's a living display with instantaneous response. Beneath the chromatophores lies the next layer, reflective cells. They bounce light, create metallic sheens, and produce cool green and blue tones. Deeper still are structures that scatter light and form a white background. By combining the activity of all these layers, a cuttlefish can control not just color, but brightness, contrast, and even the highlighting of specific zones. The most stunning part here is the speed. A cuttlefish doesn't change color slowly like a chameleon. One signal from the brain, and a wave of changes races across its skin almost instantaneously. The colored pixels expand and contract, and the pattern reorganizes in fractions of a second. Where there was just sand a moment ago, in the next instant, there's rock with algae spots or a bright, alarming display. And that's still not everything. As you might guess, such rapid color changes are vital for hunting, staying invisible to prey. But even that is only the beginning. It's one thing to blend with the background to essentially become wallpaper. It's another to turn on motion graphics. Some cuttlefish can send running stripes across their skin, dark, light waves that roll from head to tail. To us, it looks like a beautiful light effect. To potential prey, it looks like something so strange that it freezes them for a second. And that second is all the cuttlefish needs to shoot out its tentacles. In other words, a cuttlefish essentially hypnotizes its prey. Cuttlefish's camouflage isn't just about hiding. It's also a way of speaking. Certain patterns indicate threat, the classic zebra display. Others mean the opposite, flirting and courtship. And what's even more incredible is that a cuttlefish can speak with its skin to two individuals at the same time. One side may show aggression toward a rival, while the other displays a soft, romantic pattern for a female. And all of this is controlled not by some skin autopilot, but by the nervous system. At each moment, the cuttlefish brain decides which areas to highlight, which to tone down, and which textures or patterns suit the situation. It evaluates the background, lighting, and the angle from which it's being observed, and composes from all this a living, constantly updating image. From the standpoint of physics and biology, the cuttlefish has achieved what we are still trying to create in technology: a huge, flexible, energy-efficient display that can change its pattern endlessly, works in 3 dimensions, and doesn't break from the slightest bump. With its skin screen, the cuttlefish already seems strange and a little mind-blowing. But the real madness begins when you look it in the eyes. Most animals stick to the classics: round pupils, sometimes vertical like those of cats and reptiles. Rarely a horizontal slit like a goat's. But the cuttlefish's eye was clearly designed by someone tired of all the standard forms. Its pupil is a broken line resembling the letter W. In bright light, this shape contracts to a peculiar torn slit. At dusk and in deeper water, the pupil becomes more rounded again, letting in as much light as possible. But it's not just about design. This form helps solve several tasks at once. One part of the pupil looks upward, where it's brighter, and the other downward toward the darker seafloor. The cuttlefish literally divides the world into 2 hemispheres and adjusts contrast for each. But the real magic isn't even that. Our eyes detect brightness and color. That's basically it. Besides brightness, a cuttlefish's eye also reads how the light wave oscillates. In other words, polarization. To us, 2 objects might appear equally gray, completely indistinguishable. To a cuttlefish, they have different, hidden patterns, simply because the light they reflect is polarized differently. Light waves spread at different angles, which is enough for the cuttlefish to perceive the same color differently. We simply don't see it. We have no sensors for such information. For them, it's an extra layer of reality, as if another contrast-rich, invisible-to-us layer has been superimposed on top of the regular image. What does this kind of vision provide? First, it helps detect things in the water that are nearly invisible to us. Fish scales, the chitin of crustaceans, and transparent membranes subtly change the polarization of reflected light. Against glare and murky water, these slight differences stand out. Where we see just murky green, the cuttlefish recognizes the distinct silhouette of potential prey. Second, it's a language. Cuttlefish skin doesn't just change colors and patterns, it also reflects polarized light in different ways. These secret signatures are visible to other cuttlefish, but completely invisible to most predators. Essentially, cuttlefish can communicate using light signals visible only to them. And this raises a strange question. If cuttlefish have such an advanced composite display on their skin, it would be logical to expect an equally complex color processing matrix in their eyes, something like 4 types of cones, as some birds have. But no. According to research, cuttlefish, like many other cephalopods, have only 1 type of photoreceptor. 1! Even humans have 3. From the standpoint of classical vision physiology, they are almost completely color blind. Wait, how is that possible? A creature that performs full color shows on its own body and sends color-coded messages is, technically speaking, not capable of color vision as we know it. Yes, but that doesn't mean it sees black and white movies. It simply uses a different toolkit. Pupil shape, polarization, contrast, focusing at different depths, and possibly lens aberrations when different wavelengths blur slightly differently on the retina. To us, it seems like a paradox. A creature with worse formal color vision parameters than a human, yet with a functionally far more sophisticated visual perception of the world. All this light madness with the skin screen and the polarization vision cannot work on its own. The brain is behind the scenes of this show, and for a creature that is technically still a mollusk, the cuttlefish is surprisingly brainy. If we could peek inside its head, we wouldn't see a single compact blob of neural tissue, but an entire cluster of lobes and folds. The enormous visual lobes stand out most. The lion's share of its nervous system is devoted to processing images, recognizing outlines, detecting movement, evaluating contrast, understanding who is in front of it, a predator, prey, or potential mate. In terms of brain-to-body mass ratio, the cuttlefish is in the same league as normal vertebrates. Some fish, reptiles, and even small birds. This is no longer just the level of basic reflexes. This is the level where you can plan, choose, and set goals. A cuttlefish also has to manage the role of director of its own light show. The brain must not only understand what's happening around it, but also instantly decide which pattern to activate, which areas of skin to brighten, which to dim, when to launch running waves, and when, on the contrary, to freeze and blend into the background. Each such decision is thousands of tiny commands racing along nerve fibers. Send a signal here, amplify there, disable over here. And all of this operates not in a laboratory vacuum, but in the real ocean, with constantly changing lighting, background, distance to the observer, and viewing angle. Hang on! So we have a mollusk that, in real time, solves problems comparable to the work of a live colorist, cinematographer, and animator all at once? Yes! And that's without considering motor control. Beyond the skin, the cuttlefish's brain coordinates its tentacles, fins, and jet propulsion. It must keep its body at the right depth, adjust its position so it doesn't tumble, track prey, and at the right moment, fire two harpoon-like tentacles with almost pinpoint accuracy. And it must do all this without turning off its camouflage or its hypnotic light display. Experiments show that cuttlefish learn quite well. One of the most famous studies is Christelle Josette Alve's work on episodic memory in cuttlefish. Cuttlefish were given two types of food: their preferred shrimp and less desirable crabs. The crabs were always offered in the same place, but only if at least 1 hour had passed since the previous feeding. The shrimp were served in a different place, but only after 3 hours. So the cuttlefish began to take into account the delay at the tastier shrimp feeder. If too little time had passed, they didn't waste a choice on the place where their preferred food was still unavailable. Instead, they went for the accessible crab. But if enough time had passed, they headed to the location where the shrimp should already have appeared. They remember which objects are safe, which are associated with food, and which are best avoided. They can distinguish shapes and patterns, choose the correct option from several, and adjust their behavior after failure. This is no longer just a set of hardwired instincts. It's a system that adapts to experience. Some camouflage techniques are innate. A newly hatched baby can already roughly blend into a typical background. But then learning kicks in. The background changes, and so do the patterns the brain considers correct. In other words, a cuttlefish doesn't just camouflage itself as sand. It fine-tunes the skill for specific sand in a specific location under specific lighting. If you look at all this without lowering the bar, you end up with a very strange picture. We have an animal with no bones, apart from a single cuttlebone. No conventional skeleton or cerebral cortex, yet with a nervous system capable of handling tasks such as look, understand context, select pattern, animate it, steer the body, and don't miss the moment to strike. That's how it is. We're used to thinking of mollusks as simple, reflex-driven creatures. The cuttlefish gently but insistently suggests you've seriously underestimated what a nervous system can become if you give it a few 100 million years, and set the goal not to survive through strength, but through pure information juggling. It literally copy-pastes the surrounding background. Yes, when you really think about it, all of this inspires a sort of amazed bewilderment. But all those buoyancy shells, living screens, and W-shaped pupils would be nothing but pure showmanship if the cuttlefish couldn't monetize them. That is, convert them into food. And that part, at least, works perfectly. The cuttlefish is not about chasing prey. That's what tunas, dolphins, and other fast-toothy sea creatures do. The cuttlefish, by contrast, is an underwater sniper and magician rolled into one. A typical cuttlefish hunt unfolds like a good thriller. Usually, it starts with silence. Somewhere above the seafloor, among rocks and patches of algae, lies a seemingly ordinary object. A clump of sand, a fragment of brown vegetation, or even just a shadow. But it's not what it appears to be. The shapeless something is a cuttlefish, pretending to be anything but itself. Sometimes it even picks up props, pressing shells, pebbles, or seaweed against its body to complete the disguise. An unsuspecting small fish or shrimp swims closer. To it, the background looks normal. Some scattered outlines, light and shadow spots, nothing suspicious. Meanwhile, the cuttlefish may be adjusting its position by fractions of an inch while keeping its pose perfectly still. And remember, at this moment, it looks like anything harmless. A piece of trash or algae. Definitely not a quick, cunning predator. Then, the second part of the illusion kicks in. Camouflage. The skin completely adjusts its pattern to the surroundings. The same spots, the same stripes, the same grain size. The edges of the body blur. The silhouette dissolves. If you don't already know where it is, there is simply nothing for the eye to latch onto. When the prey reaches the right distance, the most interesting part begins. Of course, calling this hypnosis in the strict scientific sense wouldn't be accurate, but in practice, the cuttlefish takes advantage of the glitches in its prey's perception. It plays with light, motion, and timing so that the victim hesitates for a moment, literally like a smartphone freezing under a heavy app. And in a world where every millisecond counts, that brief moment is more than enough. This is where the cuttlefish comes to the third part of its trick: attack. It has 8 regular arms for holding, crawling, and manipulating. And then there are 2 special harpoon tentacles hidden in a fold between them. When relaxed, they're neatly tucked in. In the instant of attack, they shoot forward at incredible speed, unfold suction cup palms at their tips, and snap shut around the prey. From a distance, it looks like a glitch in the Matrix. There's absolutely nothing. Then bam! The fish is already in its grasp. What follows is less elegant, but very effective. It pulls the prey towards its beak, a hard parrot-like tool hidden at the center of the tentacles. In some species, the saliva contains venom or paralyzing substances, so the victim quickly stops struggling. Bits of flesh go to the stomach, and the cuttlefish can switch back into its innocent piece of scenery mode. All of this makes it sound like the cuttlefish is an invincible super predator, but in reality, it is constantly at risk of becoming someone else's breakfast. In the ocean, almost everyone larger than a cuttlefish and not opposed to eating squids has effectively subscribed to cuttlefish cuisine. Cod and dorado, tuna, sharks, seals, sea lions, dolphins, and sea birds. Bottlenose dolphins are especially fond of the giant cuttlefish living off Australia's southern coast. By the way, giant is just a name. They're only about 20 inches long. Now, dolphins hunt these cephalopod creatures in Spencer Gulf. But it's not just about catching and eating them. It's about how they do it. Dolphins have learned to squeeze out the cuttlefish's ink and remove its internal shell before consuming it. Almost a full table service. And then there are humans who have managed to find uses even for the ink. It ends up in risotto, pasta, paella. The eggs and juveniles are eaten by basically anything capable of reaching them. So the cuttlefish's first line of defense is very down to earth. Just don't stand out. It lives near the seabed, stays close to rocks and algae, and prefers to be active at dusk when possible. Camouflage and buoyancy control work here as a kind of invisibility mode. If the camouflage fails, and a predator notices it anyway, the escape plan kicks in. The cuttlefish rapidly contracts its muscles, propelling itself sideways with a jet of water, and simultaneously deploys the trusted special effect: ink. A dense cloud of dark pigment bursts into the water. But the key isn't the color. It's how cleverly the cuttlefish uses this superpower. Often it releases ink simply as a smoke screen to block the predator's vision while it flees. But sometimes it performs a genuinely elegant trick, releasing not a cloud but a dense blob of ink mixed with mucus that holds its shape. The result is a false twin, a black amorphous doll roughly the size of a cuttlefish. Predators instinctively go for the more visible target, strike the decoy, and the real cuttlefish slips away from the line of fire. Yet even all these tricks, camouflage, ink, jet-propelled sprints, are only one aspect of its visual magic. The other begins when the cuttlefish uses the same skin screen not to hide, but to communicate, threaten, and even deceive its own kind. This is where the real underwater theater begins. We've already seen that cuttlefish speak with their skin. A zebra pattern signals threat. Pale and spotted indicates camouflage or calm. Running waves along the body act as a semi-transparent hypnosis for prey. But its body language doesn't end there. The second layer is posture. How it holds its tentacles, bends its arms, spreads across the seafloor, or lifts itself above it. All of this is also signaling for those who know how to read it. Only recently did it become clear that these tentacle movements aren't just random flailing from fear. Studying 2 species of coastal cuttlefish, scientists identified at least 4 stable gestures that the animals repeat again and again. Cognitive neuroscientist Sophie Cohen-Bodenis and computational modeling expert Peter Neri recorded all these gesture types on video. They provisionally named them the up gesture, when the tentacles lift together above the head; the side gesture, when the arms stretch out to the left or right; the tuck roll gesture, when the cuttlefish hides its tentacles beneath its body; the crown gesture, when they fold into a boat-like or crown-like shape in front of the face. The researchers didn't film this just for fun. They later showed the recordings to other cuttlefish on a screen, and those responded. The live viewers often mimicked the observed gestures, or produced one of the same 4 patterns, rather than random movements. Meanwhile, sensors recorded subtle water vibrations accompanying these arm talks. So we're looking not at an abstract color language, but a fairly concrete set of postures and waves that cuttlefish use to signal to one another. What exactly they say with these gestures is still a big open question. We don't know how many gestures they have, whether they combine them into phrases, or whether they invent new ones. But the very fact is astonishing. An animal that writes living comics on its skin simultaneously waves its tentacles in patterns intelligible to its kin. Essentially, the cuttlefish has a fully developed body language, multi-layered, rapid, and, for now, completely beyond our understanding. And all these visual and gestural tricks reach their peak in one particular period, the mating season. That's when cuttlefish put on not just a dialogue of gestures, but a full-blown theater, complete with fights, disguises, chases, and even courtship schemes. For all their love of solitude, cuttlefish can't quite manage to be fully antisocial creatures. The breeding season is precisely the time when nature ignores the cuttlefish's personal preferences and pushes it out to society. There's no arguing with instinct. When the water warms enough and the days grow longer, entire gatherings of cuttlefish suddenly appear in coastal areas. Males and females converge in places suitable for laying eggs, among rocks, seaweed, and crevices. And that's where the peaceful world ends. Large males take up positions near the females and begin guarding them quite literally. Any other male that comes too close risks provoking a demonstrative battle. Here's what that looks like. Their bodies expand. Their fins spread wider, and the skin displays a contrasting zebra or striped combat pattern. Two males turn sideways to each other and puff themselves up in an underwater arena to see who is wider, brighter, or scarier. Sometimes it escalates into direct tentacle shoves, grappling, or attempts to push the rival away. The most fascinating trick is the split mask. In some species, a male can literally split his coloration in half. On the side facing the female, he displays a bright courtship pattern. On the side facing the rival male, he shows a calm, typically female pattern, so the rival does not perceive him as a competitor and does not initiate a fight. One and the same organism is conducting two different conversations simultaneously, using its skin. Unbelievable! In simple terms, the system should work like this. The large, bright, dominant male gets the best odds of success. But in the world of cuttlefish, there's always room for tricksters. Smaller males often play a completely different game. Instead of diving into a hopeless fight with the massive alpha, they switch into unremarkable shadow mode. They lower their contrast, mute any bright patterns, sometimes even imitating a calmer, more feminine design. From a distance, it looks just like another modest female hanging out nearby. But this little schemer isn't loitering for nothing. Gradually, the crafty little male can sneak closer to the female, slip past, and mate quickly, sometimes using the right camouflage, effectively dressing up as a female. Then he retreats just as quietly, blending back into the background. The act of mating itself doesn't look like a typical performance. It's more like a careful courier delivery. The male approaches, embraces the female with his arms, and uses his specialized tool, a modified hectocotylus tentacle. At its tip lie neatly packaged parcels, spermatophores or capsules containing sperm. With this tentacle, he carefully places them near the base of her tentacles around her mouth. In essence, a biological storage locker where the female can keep sperm for weeks. Many cephalopod males have another trick. Before making their own deposit, they try to reset the previous one. A male may use a jet of water to flush out spermatophores deposited by earlier rivals from the female's mouth cavity, and only then add his own. That's a mild version of remove previous user and install yourself. This is invisible competition at a level we cannot even imagine. The female is not a passive container here. She can collect spermatophores from multiple males and store them in different places. Some at the base of her tentacles, some in internal seminal receptacles. When the time comes to lay eggs, she decides whose material to use and in what proportion. The result is not just a clutch, but the outcome of multi-step selection. Who managed to access the female? Whose contribution wasn't washed away? And whom the female ultimately allowed into the next generation? And cuttlefish eggs are a whole aesthetic experience of their own. The female attaches them one by one to rocks, seaweed, or coral. Some species package their eggs in a dark casing, so the clutch looks like a bunch of grapes or black beads. The mother may guard the clutch for a while, airing it with water jets and cleaning off debris. The babies hatch with surprisingly good built-in settings. From birth, they more or less understand which backgrounds to mimic, whom to fear, and whom to attack. It's a powerful starter preset encoded in their genes. But everything they manage to learn beyond that remains only in their own heads, and dies with them just a few months later. Yes, the lifespan of a cuttlefish is a tragedy in itself. All this beauty, the OLED-like skin, the buoyancy shell instead of a skeleton, and an artist's brain naturally makes us think we're looking at some long-lived creature, a wise elder of the sea, spending decades perfecting its tricks, accumulating experience, growing ever more cunning and dangerous. As usual, reality takes that expectation and tosses it overboard. In truth, the cuttlefish's life plan looks like this: hatch quickly, grow even faster, reproduce once, and that's it. Most species live for only a year to a year and a half. Some don't even make it that long. No decades, no old cuttlefish who remember the old days. Where our conscious adulthood is only beginning, theirs is already rolling into the final credits. The saddest part is how tightly their death is tied to reproduction. As soon as the female lays her eggs, her body begins to deteriorate, slowly but inexorably. Hormones shift, appetite declines, and coordination falters. Behavior becomes sluggish, sometimes almost aimless. The males experience the same after a season of courtship and fighting. Their bodies simply begin to fall apart. Essentially, it's a single, all-in bet on one reproductive cycle. No second chances. No, I'll try again in a couple of years. This life strategy even has a formal name: simulparity. From the outside, it looks like absurd wastefulness. Evolution spent hundreds of millions of years assembling an astonishingly complex organism, taught it how to run light shows, solve hunting problems by predicting prey behavior, play social theater, and then gave it a single season to use all of it. Why? If you strip away emotion, the logic is simple and rather cold. The sea is warm, food is generally abundant, and growth is fast. A cuttlefish doesn't need to live long to pay off. It doesn't need to accumulate resources for decades like some whales. It just needs one successful run. Grow, find a mate, lay enough eggs for some offspring to survive. That's it. Mission accomplished. After that, the adult becomes ballast in evolutionary terms. It eats the same prey as the young, occupies territory, carries accumulated damage, parasites, and potential mutations. From the standpoint of natural selection, it's easier to hardwire shut down after reproduction than to maintain an endlessly aging body. The most frightening part isn't even death itself. It's that death cuts off anything that could have become a kind of culture. Cuttlefish have no elders who live long enough to refine rare hunting techniques, invent special clever camouflage for a particular spot, and then spend years teaching the young. Nothing can be passed down through generations. It's like a civilization where everyone abruptly dies at 20, and each new group of teenagers has to reinvent the wheel, the internet, and Netflix from scratch. Who knows? If cuttlefish lived even 10 years, who would be the pinnacle of evolution today?